Today we got a box of goodies to open up from Crutchfield. This is going to be a pre-wire we're going to do together, getting a vehicle side harness and the radio harness put together. This is going to go into a 2014 Ram diesel 3500. So this is pretty standard, straightforward stuff. Let's take this out and take a look at it. And then we got our station set up. We're going to solder our harnesses together. We're not going to heat shrink in this case. We're just going to tape it together with some Super 33 Plus. And then usually I would use Tessa tape to kind of wrap it and protect the harness. But this is actually just a little tip and trick. You could just use hockey tape to kind of substitute for Tessa tape. All right, let's take a look here. So, pretty standard kit of stuff. We're going to have our Double-DIN. In this case, we're actually getting away with a little bit less cost. This Ram does not have the 8.1 factory Uconnect screen, so we have less to interface with the vehicle. But we still have a decent cost in the harness. 140 bucks. This will keep steering wheel controls and interface with the vehicle itself. And we're going to do a backup camera. So not that we need this for the backup camera. Most of that's just handled through this guy here, but we have provisions for it. Double-DIN kit. This is vehicle specific. I did see a note when buying the parts that radios that have controls on the left side might be a little recessed within this trim. So we're going to kind of mock that up and just see how that looks. Crutchfield's nice enough to send some documentation. This looks like, let's see, just like a brochure. They should have some customized instructions, I think, that they send. So basically, we're going to pre-wire this, and then we're going to ship it to a family member out in Montana for him to do the actual install. But we're going to wire it and make it as plug and play as we can. There's still going to be some assembly, you know, with the kit and everything, but we'll at least try to make it a little bit easier. This should just be a typical backup camera. Yeah. Yep, so this is just a license plate style. This Ram doesn't have a factory bed. It's the kind of aftermarket metal flatbed, so installing this along the frame will probably just be even easier for him. Let's get these packing peanuts out of here. And then this is just an antenna adapter, so factory side to the aftermarket side. Let's see if there was no instructions. They might have came digitally. So, camera we do not need. Brochure we do not need. Antenna we do not need. We'll look at this in a little bit. Right now, all we're going to do is focus on the harness. So let's pull out the Kenwood side first. So this unit, pretty straightforward. The only thing with these nowadays is you kind of have the luxury of choice if you want CD player or not. In this case, we opted for no CD, no disk drive, because all we really care about is CarPlay, which will actually make our lives a little bit easier because you see the mounting depth is that much shallower without the disk drive. So that's good to see. Take a look at the back side here. It's actually one of my first times seeing one of these Kenwoods kind of in the shallow mount. I've seen the Alpine units back when I used to do this professionally, but this will be a nice fit. I think in the instructions, it does talk about needing to trim back some dash plastic, I think to fit a traditional depth Double-DIN, so I think he'll probably be able to get away without needing to do that in this case. Should fit just shallow enough, so that should be good. Go ahead and place this back gently for shipping. Perfect. This is kind of nice because I'm getting back to my roots a little bit. I used to do car audio and remote starts and all the 12-volt certification things back in the day. So it's a nice kind of back to my roots. Definitely not professional anymore, but some of these skills definitely stay with you. They might just get rusty over time, but it's kind of like riding a bike, how cliche that might be. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and pull this harness out. Keep this microphone in here, some of the instructions. It's funny, it looks like a GPS antenna, but I kind of wonder how necessary that is when using CarPlay. But usually those antennas are just meant to be, you know, if you lose signal for a little bit, they're kind of like a buffer. Go through a dead zone, cell service wise, or in a tunnel. They kind of help buffer that a little bit. So, okay. So for right now, let's just keep everything together. Go ahead and keep this fully assembled just so we keep everything accounted for, and put this to the side for now. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at everything here. Okay, perfect. Let's get the harness out. So in this case, we're already going to do kind of a cardinal sin, and we're actually going to bypass the parking brake switch and just ground it. Typically, JVC Kenwoods just require a constant ground signal. I think there were some other models like Pioneer, I want to say, that was a little bit more intelligent, where you had to toggle basically the e-brake on and off and then keep it on. So it needed a signal, a lack of signal, then a signal again, essentially, to allow the parking brake for things like screen mirroring and HDMI and stuff like that, but we're not too worried about that here. It's more of a liability thing. So for anybody who's unfamiliar, typically a radio harness will look just like this. It's just going to be power, ground, speaker, channels, and then some various outputs and inputs. So like a 12-volt out for an amp, a parking brake switch, illumination so you can control it with the dimness of the dash, stuff like that. Remote control for Kenwoods are typically going to be for steering wheel controls. A lot of times it's a 3.5 millimeter auxiliary, like headphone jack. Kenwoods are a little bit different, Kenwood JVCs. But this pack unit's going to be pretty straightforward for steering wheel controls. There's typically just a Phillips head dial on the side that you basically will adjust it to a certain number depending on radio manufacturer. So put this to the side because we're going to rebox that. Some instructions, the pack interface, and then this is going to be the vehicle side of the harness. So what we're essentially going to connect together be the factory harness, so you don't have to worry about cutting anything. Be some navigation outputs, it's fine. Here's steering wheel controls. So assuming we're going to have to, like we typically do, connect a single wire here and then headphone jack in the back of the radio. Some camera pieces. Okay, this harness is actually pretty well organized already. So all we're going to do here is we're just going to strip the ends of these. Let's grab a trash can while we work. All right, we'll just use a spare box for trash. Just going to be wire ends, not too worried. All right, so let's go ahead and start with splitting these channels, get a little bit of slack. The speakers themselves. Okay, and then all we're doing is we're taking all the ends off. couple things we probably don't need, so I'm going to leave those insulated for right now. I'm going to cut this ground down because we don't need it to be this long of a pigtail. Okay, this should be everything that we for sure need right away. Let's go ahead and get the steering wheel control input. A little longer than we need, not a big deal. Okay. Let's get our solder station warming up here. Let's see what we have this set to. Just crank the heat. These are quick blips. And then we have lead-free solder just because I like the way that that melts better. Let's go ahead and get the vehicle side prepped now. Possibly going to need this orange for illumination if we decide to hook that up, so do that here in a sec. Make sure not to stab yourself as you're taking this tape off. Okay. Perfect. Before we get too crazy, let's go ahead and just get other things prepped. Documentation here. Should be the second or third page that gives us some specifics. Smell the soldering iron heating up. Let's make sure nothing's touching that. All right, so here's the setting that I was referring to. So there's a programming button. Does not require programming unless you want to reassign. So yeah, this is pretty out of the box, which is nice. That's why I like these pack harnesses versus the Metra or the iData Link. Okay, so we have a Kenwood, that's a 3. We have the headphone jack. See above chart, yep. And then, yep, so we want blue, yellow. Kenwood only, never JVC. That's interesting. I don't know if that's been my experience, but that might be the modern experience, so. Okay, so we're default on 0. Let's find something to turn this with. Yeah, we could probably use a pick tool or a knife to turn this, but let's just use the right tool. Flathead. So we're just going to number 3. And that's pretty much as simple as it is. That's kind of nice. So, yep, so you want to make sure to set that switch, which we did. Set radio select switch before connecting vehicle harness. Yep. Radio select switch to 3. These two sides, which are going to be steering wheel control. And then I'm guessing, okay, this might just not be a used interface there. That might be for programming purposes, so we're good there. Okay. Yeah, sure. Okay. That's probably what that's for firmware stuff. And settings there. Okay. Should be good preset wise. So let's go ahead and move these instructions. All right. Let's get our workspace kind of set up here. So we're just going to go color to color. There's really nothing too crazy about this, as long as you're paying attention to what you're doing. It's pretty straightforward stuff. So we're just going to twist. And then we're going to apply less is more in this case for solder with this gauge. We don't want a cold solder joint, so we're just going to twist. Kind of give myself a little bit of height here just so I can get under it with the iron. I'm actually going to take the solder out because it's easier to kind of work with, typically in my hand. And I don't know if I have a flat blade solder tip or not, so we're going to see. Kinda. All right, let's go ahead. Okay, seems pretty good. So we're just going to heat up the wire for a second. And then what I like to do is just touch the iron against the wire a little bit. And it'll pull up into the wire itself. Make sure this is hot enough and the tip is. So you'll see it kind of take over the wire a little bit. So it doesn't need to be much. Just kind of getting a feel for how this one behaves. That's all we need there. Let's go ahead and get a little bit more slack to play with here. Okay. Make sure this isn't burning much. No. Little cobweb. That's fine. You can tell how much I solder these days. All right. So yeah, instead of heat shrinking everything, which we could, I mean, that's not a waste of time by any means, but we're just going to insulate each individually. This will be more than enough to insulate our connections and keep them from touching. We don't have any strands poking out, so we don't need to worry about going too thick with it. So we're basically going to repeat this across the board. Let's just go color by color. Just grab whatever random color you have here. Purple, black. Let's get a light. All right, this shouldn't be too bright in your guys' face, so let's do purple, black. Okay, right here. So again, color to color. Depending on the color itself, some things are easier to see with a black tracer, like this purple. So we'll just double check. Yep. Okay. Good. See, it doesn't take much. And again, we don't want to gob it. Kind of defeats the purpose. So it's a lot of repetition. Just going. And you could crimp. Don't get me wrong. You could barrel connect or crimp caps. I don't judge, but a lot of professional shops will just crimp cap because it's faster. Solder's got a little bit more of that personal touch, and in my opinion, it's going to be make for a cleaner looking harness. The straight lines don't have a cluster of crimp caps getting zip tied and bundled up out of the corner. A lot of times a soldering station with alligator clips will make this a little bit easier to twist, but we're not doing it the easy way. We're doing it the be too smart. So okay, I'm gonna keep this out of the way with the iron. and keeping it elevated so you can actually twist things and they stay. You can see there the kind of the wires memory, or the strength of the insulation wanted to kind of bring it in. Like you see there, kind of bring it into the middle of the bundle. So kind of fight that a little bit, but that's fine. Just separate these. Just get a gray black. So these are just the speakers that we're basically worrying about. So there's going to be two, basically for each speaker channel. Speakers receive signal via AC voltage. So you basically have a positive and negative, not in the traditional 12 volt direct current way, but from a channel perspective, you basically have two wires per speaker. It's the reason for the solid color, and then the black trace for each speaker. Having this light's helpful, makes you be able to see, make sure I'm hitting the ones that are solid, ones that are with a black trace, not mixing up speaker phases unintentionally here. Okay. It's funny, once you do maybe one or two radios, this becomes kind of second nature. In the beginning, it's like, you know, all the vehicle instructions, documentation that we have here. You can kind of see when I went through that radio harness paperwork how much I ignored that wasn't really relevant to what we were doing, or, you know, it's kind of telling you stuff that you already know. But when you first do these, it's one of those situations where you got to figure out, like, okay, what should I know? What do I need to know? What can I kind of ignore? And that's why in a lot of cases too, I'm seeing kind of a shift in the market. A lot of people using those eBay CarPlay Tesla screens. I actually did one for a brother-in-law in his little Ford Fiesta. And it worked out well. It's got CAN bus interface. You get one with a decent amount of memory, decent amount of RAM, because it's basically a tablet. You know, it's pretty responsive. But you get what you pay for. You know, sometimes in that Fiesta situation, it was meant to be a dash kit pre-assembled, and it was not the correct one for that vehicle, even though everything said that it was. I think there's a lot of differences, you know, in the Ford products, European versus domestic. So I think there was a European Fiesta, but we made the dash kit work. Just got to get a little creative. That's the thing with this. This is mostly going to be standardized sizing, so we don't have to worry about too many surprises when we get in there. And that's the whole reason why I'm comfortable with this basically remote, you know, radio install, sending this stuff out to Montana. He could easily handle doing this wiring, but we might as well just pre-work it, get it ready. That way he just deals with the physical mounting and the dash removal and stuff like that. All right. Even though this is a modern, you know, harness and radio offering, it's all pretty straightforward stuff. Yeah, if you got something like this back in the 90s, you don't have to worry about any of this stuff. But even in the late 90s, that thing has steering wheel controls. It's not much, but it's got volume and, you know, channel or source changes. So you do technically still have to do, you know, some pretty expensive harnesses and interfaces to get steering wheel controls to stay, even for older vehicles, which is kind of nuts. In that thing's case, it wasn't really worth it. We had a Kenwood Double-DIN in there for a while. I think I actually had some Alpine Type R speakers in it too. Non-amplified, but it still sounded pretty good. But yeah, this will be a nice standard thing where there's not a lot of guesswork when it comes to an eBay unit. You know, the tablet screen was an option for this truck, but spend a little, that's the thing too, is like you spend a little bit more on this solution with the Kenwood. And that's a hard sell for people because those eBay things for 130 bucks are pretty enticing. Because this was like, God, 500 just parts. You know, labor for double-din, I mean, 150, 200 bucks, you know, for someone's time to do all this. And then a camera install can be, you know, 100, 200 on its own, just because that's pretty labor or time intensive to run it along the frame and get it up inside the cab and the dash and stuff. So we're saving a little bit. So this, you know, route of using, you know, name brand standard aftermarket double-din sizing, you know, aftermarket interface, harness, it kind of makes sense here. But even with the fact that we're not spending money on labor, you know, you still look at those eBay units for 130. It's like, why wouldn't you do that? That's why we did it for that Fiesta, because the car just doesn't really command the value of a full aftermarket solution. For me, you know, I'm always thinking about scalability when it comes to going this route, because, you know, I value certain niche things like, you know, higher voltage preamp outputs for the RCAs for amplifiers, so like 5-volt outputs on basically the red and white versions of these that you would see on VCRs. Technology hasn't changed much, but, you know, I value some stuff like that because I'm always thinking like, okay, yep, I have amplifiers kind of laying around the house, you know, high quality, high end aftermarket speakers, or at least what I consider. They're not Audison or, you know, Focal. Alpine type bars are pretty decent, especially when amplified. But I'm always thinking about, you know, how to grow the system when this double-din and this backup camera are probably going to be all that's going to be needed for this Dodge Ram in its lifetime. A little bit of melted schmutz on that, so wait for that to cool down and pull that off. Yeah, it's just a little bit of burnt insulation. This ground, Kenwood side, is actually a thicker gauge, same with the constant 12 volt, which is actually kind of nice to see, but takes a little bit longer for the strands and the wire to heat up to take the solder. So something else you'll see in like legitimate electronic repair, you know, is the use of flux, and this is thin enough gauge to where it just sucks in especially the lead-free copper that doesn't bubble and fall off. You know, it's just fine. So let's do a quality check. Make sure we got all these channels right. Black tracer, solid. It's funny how this one has a black tracer on one side, then it's a 180 for the other side, which is obviously just how I wired it, but whatever. Just makes it all the more difficult to turn these and check. Yep, we're good. Okay, cool. What else we got? We got a reverse. This is going to be a reverse input, and this should be a reverse output. So we should be able to connect these purples. So this will basically be the way for the radio to get a trigger. Typically it is a 12 volt positive switching, positive input trigger from the vehicle to know when it goes into reverse. A lot of times you're supplementing that with just the reverse tail light, getting voltage, 12 volts, and then that's turning the camera on. So basically that's how the radio knows to go, you know, here's a main screen, here's your Apple CarPlay playing, flick in reverse and the screen changes. It's basically whenever this wire gets power or a signal. So purple, white. Instinct will tell you that that is just fine to connect, but you never want to assume. So let's double check what these are from an output standpoint on the car. Okay, purple, white. See, that's vehicle speed output. Okay, so we don't want that. Here's reverse output, which is green. Okay, so we do want this. Let's take a look. It's funny because this is red, white, but I don't see any. Oh yeah, parking brake output. Okay. So let's think about this for a sec. So we do want a reverse output. So we want out from the car and then into the radio. So let's do a reverse. Let's check the Kenwood manual too. Here's one of these situations where you're like, well, it should be color to color, right? And it's like, well, from the standardized side of the harness, which is the power and speaker channels, typically, yes. Color to color, you don't really have to think much about it. But then you get to this side, and you have to start looking at what are the inputs from the kind of extracurricular wires. Okay, let's find a wiring diagram here. Yep, white, purple, connect to the vehicle's lamp harness when using optional rear camera. Yep, so we're going to want that. Let's put this aside for a second. So we are going to proceed green to purple, white. Okay. Pretty safe thing for us to kind of logic our way through, but it does pay to slow down and make sure that you are paying attention to what you're doing here, because a vehicle speed output doesn't really match with an input on a reverse camera line, so you would have some funky stuff. Probably wouldn't hurt anything, but it would definitely be not what the radio's expecting to see on that specific circuit. Okay, so again, just a logic. Output of reverse signal, 12 volt from the car, which is kind of what we're assuming, comes out of the harness. Sometimes that doesn't always work, so this still might need to get, hardwired with a external voltage, but then reverse input. So out from here into there should be all that takes. Need a bigger working surface here. Let's see. Get you insulated. And we'll keep these separate from the main harness just in case he needs to get in here and mess with these. See if we can kind of line these up a little separately. Okay, and then we have, just show you guys the rest of this. Let's make this easier to read. Okay, so we took our green, which is our reverse output. We have a blue-white, which is basically a 12-volt output. We don't need that for anything. We have a parking brake output, so this would be if we wanted to truly use the cars. Well, in a Ram's case, it's going to be probably a third pedal parking brake, so we don't really care about that. Purple-white. I normally don't care about illumination, but we'll do it for him, just so he kind of keeps that factory behavior. So orange-white is a positive output. And then let's double check from our dimmer control. Yep, so we're going to go ahead and connect that. So basically orange to orange. Looks like in this case it'll be orange-white to orange-white, so see how much that gets us. Perfect. Okay. So in this case, we are going color to color. So you can see how it sometimes will apply, but again, you just never want to assume. Radios are a little less risk, but if you assume a wire color and a remote start install, yeah, that's like putting a blindfold on and wiring that you need to check circuit behavior, making sure things are doing what they're supposed to be doing, so you don't assume a wire is a, lock or unlock signal and it ends up being something really sensitive, like a CAN network, wire. Obviously, those would be twisted pair, and you could pretty easily spot those. But the point is, if you send power down the wrong line, you can really pay for it later. Okay, so we don't need to do anything here. This is a 12-volt output. This is also a 12-volt output. We don't need those touching. These would be for turning on amps, so we're actually good there. We don't need anything else here on these. I like to cut things in more of a staggered line so that there's no or less risk of things touching wire to wire. So go ahead and get these taped off. You can also see that this harness has a fusible link on the constant power, which is kind of nice. So you'll usually have a 10 amp fuse on the radio itself as kind of a last, ditch effort. I'm sure this is going to be a 2 amp, so quite sensitive. That could pop for a lot quicker than a 10 amp, which is probably good for this. So I'm going to go ahead and fold these over. Let's actually just do this. I want to put it against something that I can kind of give some strength to it. So we'll just tape it. Cut these down a little bit more. These crimpers might be getting a little dull. They've definitely seen some use cutting through some things they probably aren't intended to, but if every hammer or if every tool isn't a hammer, then are you really even using your tools, So what are you supposed to do, Okay. We'll go ahead and give some tension relief on that too, so those don't pull out. And then again, we're gonna make this a little bit prettier with some hockey tape. Again, readily available alternative to Tessa tape. $5 at Scheels, $4 versus Tessa tapes, kind of a premium. We can remove these, but I'm going to leave these on here for him just in case he has to do any troubleshooting. I doubt it, but let's just not back ourselves into a corner. Okay. Steering wheel control. Make sure our iron doesn't end up touching anything behind. Okay, pull that in nicely. Yeah, you always want to make sure whenever you're kind of extending the iron, putting it into kind of busy territory, telescoping it in basically. You just want to be mindful of where your iron is near so you don't accidentally touch a dash piece or, another wire and scorch it from the backside. Go ahead and double this up just because I felt like it was a little thin in one spot, so I feel better about that. Okay, so this will stay capped. This is going to go to the Kenwood. We're going to kind of mock some stuff up. This will go into the pack unit. Okay, we'll go ahead and wire this kind of separately off the branch. This is going to be a parking switch, which, yes, does have this tip. I am going to cut it off because we do not need that. And then we're going to basically do what is referred to as a military splice into the ground. So let's go ahead and pull this off. Okay, I guess not. It's actually a sticker, it feels like, so we'll just leave it. Pull a little bit more. Okay. So military splice isn't anything too exciting. See a little bit of copper shining there, so let's go ahead and cover that. Maybe another reason for heat shrink being the better option, especially if this was to be, you know, in the elements, the engine bay, but it's interior, so low risk. So we're basically just going to open gently the ground, take a pick tool, pierce the strands, go ahead and twist these strands, then we're just going to insert. Now we can solder this, we don't have to, but we probably will just to keep things consistent. Sometimes you get one strand that's kind of hanging up, so you just gotta make sure you got a straight shot. Okay. We're gonna kind of bring these together. Do a little wrap. Go ahead and heat this strand. Might touch a little insulation, but that's okay. Yeah, I'm kind of doing this from a weird angle, but that's fine. Yeah, you can see we kind of touched the tape a little bit, but that's fine. Doesn't need to be perfect, just needs to make contact and stay making contact. So again, this basically will bypass the need for the Kenwood to see a parking brake input from the vehicle. Professionally, you don't do this. Personally, who cares? It's your radio. Do what you want. All right, camera input, or actually might be a factory output. We're gonna leave that alone. I'm not gonna tape this right now just because I don't want to ruin the plating, the contacts, if we do need to use it for any reason. Okay, so we have this. So I'm just gonna think to myself, what could he possibly need access to that we shouldn't bury in a more permanent tape? Let's see. He might need reverse in case this output from the harness itself or the interface doesn't actually provide, you know, a 12-volt signal. They claim to. Sometimes you'd be surprised. GMs and Volkswagens, sometimes they don't give like switch power like they claim to. So we're not gonna 100% trust that. So I'm going to leave this somewhat exposed for him. This we're going to bring in just like this. So this will go over here. This will go to the radio. So we're just going to kind of work our way logically. Make sure this tape is still nice and sticky. Yep. Okay. Okay, so it's easy to identify. I'm going to keep the purple out of this bundle. So I'm just kind of thinking ahead to, you know, worst case if he needs to supplement his own connection into reverse. I don't work him into a corner. I'm going to leave it as a pigtail. Seems like a good enough idea. So we're going to kind of fold it upon itself. That way it's easily identifiable. Kind of bring this illumination wire. Let's actually wrap this a little differently. Don't want to stress that solder joint too much, so I'm going to kind of fold it in. Again, I should be taking these stickers off, but we'll leave them. Again, if he needs to remove this tape to gain access to anything for any reason, then it's one less thing for him to have to fight identifying things. Okay, and we'll also make sure as I kind of, you wouldn't really think there's much of an art to harness wrapping, but there's some logic that goes into it. So I'll make sure to terminate it nice and easily too in case he needs to unwrap. So it's not a big problem there. Okay, so this can go up here. So we're still good. Just kind of clustering our solder joints. Okay, so now we're going to branch off. Let's see where we can get to here. Looks like this camera input we can kind of go either way with, so that's fine. This will go up. We do have a fuse to navigate, so a couple fuses actually. So we're actually going to terminate this right now. Should be rippable, but whatever. Go ahead and cut a little relief into it, and it should. Okay. Perfect. So we're going to go ahead and start right here. Doesn't need to be a lot, so we're just going to cut a section. Okay. We have to cut tips of our fingers off here as we're cutting the tape. Okay, perfect. So then this we could actually bring over because it seems to logically kind of fall. Not sure how that steering wheel control input wire escaped me from the tape I just did, but whatever. I'll just double it up. Good. And don't get me wrong, this Tessa tape alternative, this hockey tape that we're doing, it's way overkill for this whole job, but whatever. Attention to detail, you know, it makes a difference. All right, so I'm going to tie these two together just so they have a little bit of strength. It's almost like a bonded pair. This shielded wire and this steering wheel controller. Okay. Let's go ahead and tie this down. Okay. So ideally what we have here is kind of a logical split. I would like to protect this, but I'm going to leave it for now, just to inform him. So we have Kenwood side with an exposed reverse tag in case he needs to, you know, open this up in military, splice a 12-volt in. Hopefully that's enough slack for him, but he can always remove this tag to create more. I'm going to leave this tag on, but this side would basically go here. Okay, well there's maybe a reason why we don't want to do what we did. That's why we kind of mock things up. So this is a little bit tight, I would say. I don't want to have too much tension on that pin. So let's actually undo. And see if that makes a difference. Here's an example where we might have worked ourselves into a corner, but that is fine. It's probably not a big deal, but just go the extra. Take the extra minute here. This I want slack. It would be cleaner if I could do this, but I want this to have slack so I could reach the radio. And then this also needs to reach the interface. So yeah, it probably makes sense to do these. Where's my tape? Right in front of my face. Okay. Let's go ahead and just do one of these. Just so it matches here. Again, be mindful of where your fingers are behind you. Don't need this turning into a stupid accident. Trip to the Band-Aid drawer, put some tape on it with a paper towel, you know, what you gotta do. Okay, so that should be good. So we're gonna kind of mock this. This will get plugged in. This will have a little bit of breathing room so that we could bring it up here towards the radio. And then this will reach the radio, no problem. Good. So that's about it from the harness. Again, we have this pre-programmed now. Set to 3 for Kenwood. Let's go ahead and make sure that's actually on 3. It looks like it's a little hair. Feels like it's got, yeah, logical clicks to it. So steering wheel control interface to the headphone jack, essentially to the back of the Kenwood harness, RAM side connector, plugins. Okay. So that is the harness pre-wired. That's it. Again, this is more the pretty section for sure. But you can see that there's some logic. And again, it's one thing if you just wanted to clump it all together like this. But then you can see if things logically fall that way, they may not make a lot of sense when they're actually connected in the car or when you're trying to, you know, shove it in where it needs to go. So that's that. Let's take a look and see what the radio depth looks like with that kit. Just because I'm curious. Go ahead and clean up our space here for a sec. Okay, we'll go ahead and get the soldering station unplugged and let it cool down. Let's move the harness to the side. Okay, so before we go ahead and start messing with the radio itself, I'm just going to pull the kit and just get an idea. You'll kind of see my logic as I go through this. Basically what I'm making sure of is that the radio doesn't sit too deep in the dash and you can't really get to the buttons on the side. And there's a couple different ways to solve for that. Usually the kits will have different mounting points to bring the radio in and out a little bit. It's not a lot of movement typically, but there's typically a little bit of, you know, leeway. Okay, I just want to cut this open cleanly so that I can kind of repackage it. Okay. Even though the whole thing's going to have to, yeah, come off to get out, but whatever. Maybe just tape it. It's plastic. I'm not too worried about it getting damaged in shipping, but yeah, you can definitely see that it has a little bit of a curvature to the mold. And then because these are slotted, this is where I kind of mean that you can go for some depth adjustments. So let's just go ahead and give it a quick mock-up. Basically trying to prevent anything being too surprising when he gets in there. So go ahead and take this out. Be very careful. Looks like it's got a screen protector on it, which is great. Okay, yeah, so I'm more worried just about him being able to access these. Yeah, I see what they're talking about. It's not great, but that's about as, you know, out you can go. I don't think you're probably going to do this because you'll start to see some gaps, essentially. But yeah, it's just kind of the nature of the beast when it comes to vehicle-specific applications. So basically, as you're thinking about it, you know, he's in the driver's seat, he's going to reach over. He's not going to have a clear shot to the buttons. He's going to have to kind of reach around. But that's fine. I thought it was going to be a lot more drastic than that. So, okay. So again, we are pre-wired and basically done the pre-work to send this out for somebody else to perform the install. This is your, you know, average everyday radio install typically. Nothing too complex about this. You know, again, we saw, you know, interface, a specialized interface get wired versus just a direct, you know, wire-to-wire harness. But that is mostly in this case for steering wheel control, vehicle speed and parking brake and stuff like that. So There's a little bit of creature comforts, but a lot of times that's kind of wasted. You don't really always need those because you don't always do a backup camera, you know, and you don't always do some of the extracurricular stuff. Or sometimes you don't always have steering wheel controls. You know, not every trim has them, so sometimes you don't care about keeping them. It's kind of hard to justify the cost sometimes, so. All right. Fighting this a lot more than we should, but we're at least trying to put it together somewhat nicely. Okay, that way we can kind of retape it. Attention to detail. That's what I'm calling it. Okay. Radio will go back in. It's backwards. Let's see. Nope. Make sure nothing stupid happens with the Postal Service. Let's see here. This is going to get its manual back. We'll probably put the harness actually in the pack box just because it's got a lot of room for it. Okay. All right. So the rest of this is going to be me putting boxes back together, reorganizing things for shipping. But you guys saw kind of the most important part, the part that I feel like people have a lot of questions on. I know I sure did when I first started. You know, how do you know when colors match and when they don't? And what do you connect and what don't you? You saw there were a couple situations like that where we left things just not terminated to anything, or we had different colors go into each other. So when in doubt, Crutchfield feels like a good resource because I haven't seen it yet, but supposedly they send, you know, some personalized instructions that should take a lot of the guesswork of this out. But reading the documentation helps too. And being like, oh, okay, so black to black, that's negative to negative. Don't always rely on the colors. You know, check what they actually do. And that'll help kind of guide you. But let me know down below if radio installs are something that are super common to you guys. You know, if you've done a million, either professionally or not, or if this is the first time you're seeing it. This stuff can be kind of interesting. And you don't see it too often, at least in YouTube video form. So if you like this type of content, let me know. You know, I have plenty of opportunities for remote starts and show you guys how some of those are wired. And those are a little bit more complex, but you know, everything's teachable. So if you enjoyed this type of content, if you learned something new, you know, let me know down below. Please take a moment to support the channel by dropping a like, commenting, subscribing, and letting me know what you thought about this. Anything you would do differently? Is this kind of like a whole different language to you? Or is this something that you're super comfortable with doing on your own? Let me know. I can answer any questions you guys might have. And with that, I will see you in the next one. Thank you.